Hi Blue Marble Riders, out and about on a lovely day. I thought I'd bring you part 2 of bikes I'd love to swing a leg over. There are bikes that I'd either actually like to buy or perhaps just try. But these are bikes that are either out already or are forecast to be out in the near future in the next year or two. And so this is the second part of my multi-part list on this one. And before I get going on the first one, there are some commonalities in this list today. 2 of these bikes have S's, 1s and 0s in their names. And 2 of these bikes I would put in something called, and if you're a reader you'll know what I'm talking about, the steampunk genre. That is bikes perhaps representing a bygone era, but with modern technology. You'll get what I mean in a minute. The other thing that a lot of these bikes have in common is that I don't expect that many of you will be prepared for what I'm going to say. These aren't bikes you typically associate with the Blue Marble Rider. So heads up, could be interested. Like I said, I didn't necessarily say I wanted to own all of them. I'll let you know if that's the case. But I would definitely like to swing a leg over and give them a shot. Bike number 1 is probably the flagship from BMW, the S1000RR. I told you, not a bike you'd associate with me. I'm not someone who does track days. I'm not a particularly fast rider. I'm not someone who's been interested in having absolutely race-dedicated motorcycles in my life. However, the S1000RR by BMW seems to have taken a giant leap forward in livability for sport bikes. Essentially, it's a crotch rocket. Now, I know it's not a 600, but it might as well be. It's very light.
And 427 pounds wet. That's 90% of its tank capacity in all fluids. Carbon wheels, heated grips, and all sorts of racing doodads. A computer that works either on the track or as a wonderful GPS. This bike actually offers a lot of flexibility for what it is, an extreme race bike. And according to MCN, refined and reasonably comfortable when riding it long distances. They rode it all the way back from Germany after it trounced the RSV4 and the Ducati V4S. And the M version is cheaper than a base model Panigale or the RSV4. And in many ways, this bike is more impressive as a road bike with cruise control, heated grips, and a shift cam engine that gives it the torque of a Hayabusa. You can get up to top gear just like that. It's smooth and easy to ride. And all of this just amazes me when you take a look at the thing and think, nah, that's going to be uncomfortable and dangerous. I think BMW have pulled off a masterstroke with this bike. I'm not saying it's a grand tourer or anything like that, but for what it can do on the track, the contrast on the road is amazing.
A lot of reports, particularly by MCN, who took it and did a shootout between it, the V4, and the RSV4 by Aprilia. This came out on top, not only for its speed and pace, but its ease of riding and the build quality, and not only that, the day-to-day livability. Apparently off the track, this thing is quite pleasant to ride around at normal pace and live with. Okay, so that was the S1000RR by BMW. Let's move on to something that's completely different, probably the far end of the spectrum. My daughters and many people I know are always saying, you can't make your mind up. Listen to the music you listen to. Don't you have a favorite? And I always say to them, everything's my favorite. I like all genres. There isn't a genre of music I do not like. And it's the same with bikes. I like all genres of bikes. There may have been bikes I have damned with faint praise because perhaps they haven't lived up to expectations. But that's not because of the type of bike they are. So this next bike might catch you out. It's a Triumph. It's not any of their sportier bikes. It's the Bobber TFC. I know that's not something you usually acquaint with me, but if you remember in the last list I was interested in the BMW R18, the big new Beamer coming out, the cruiser. Well, for the same reason I'm interested in the Triumph Bobber TFC. Now TFC, Triumph Factory Custom, I believe only 750 of them are being made.
Like some other bikes on this list, this bike looks like it was designed in the 30s, mimics it very well. But it's dripping with CNC machined pearls and all sorts of other bling off it that make it look like something out of a steampunk genre. Part old, part new. I like the seating position. I like the proportions and the style. The bar ends with a straight shooting pipe. The saddle raised off the back end. And the hardtail look to the thing, even though there is a suspension on it. I think it's finished beautifully. I like the fact it's got a large, lazy displacement engine. It's the sort of bike that you could just burble around on, having. It's not the sort of bike I would own if I only had one bike. It's a niche bike, and something that demands that it's ridden only on pleasant days. It's not a commuter. You're not packing this down with anything. You're going to be taking a backpack and a smile, and that's about all you'll have room for. But it is a bike I'd love to swing a leg over and give a go, despite some of the media reports on it.
Okay, there are lots of people out there who have probably been yelling at their computer saying, you know, you haven't even talked about electric bikes yet. Okay, well, here we go, and probably another shocker for you. Oh, sorry about that dreadful pun. But it is a shocker, and it's the Harley-Davidson LiveWire. That is a bike I would really like to get my leg over. There are lots of things about the Harley-Davidson LiveWire that make it more appealing than other bikes. One, I like the looks. They, for whatever reason, and looks are always very subjective, they really tickle my fancy. Ooh, maybe not the right thing to say there. Like many electric bikes, it will charge to about 80% in 40 minutes. The range on it is about the same as many. Take it on the highway and start cruising along at 60 or 70, and it's no different from any of the others. You're going to get probably 90 to 120 miles out of it, depending on how hard you push it. Electric bikes are very different from conventionally engined motorcycles in that they don't like highways. They do like lots of stops and starts.
There are a couple of strikes against the Harley for me, and it's not because it's a Harley, it's because it's an electric bike. All electric bikes have these strikes. One, for me, riding a motorcycle is about all of my senses. Those things are very, very important to me. The concussive explosions that a normally aspirated motorcycle engine gives off, the growl, the vibration through the frame, all of that is very tactile and very important to my experience. I was listening to the CEO of Zero Motorcycles, and he was very open when he said, I never want to go back to that. I like the turbine smoothness. He appreciates the sound of his environment rather than the sound of the motorcycle. And the purity of the riding experience. Basically, you're on a magic carpet. There's nothing interfering with the actual experience of that. And that leads us to the second strike against electric motorcycles right now. It's in their nature to be quiet, and unfortunately, particularly in the urban environment, you on a motorcycle can get lost in the background so easily, and with no noise. And I'm not a big advocate of loud pipes save lives, but with absolutely no noise, little more than a whine, I'm not sure you're going to stand out enough to be safe.
So that was the Harley-Davidson LiveWire. Would I own one? Certainly not as an only bike. Any electrical bike I wouldn't own as an only bike, simply because the infrastructure is not out there, the charging, the ability to charge them, the types of chargers, I just couldn't be restricted by that. But again, if I'd won the lottery, maybe it would be in the stable. I certainly do want to throw a leg over and get my first electric motorcycle ride under my buttocks, and I want it to be that one. Okay, so the next bike I'm interested in has a lot in common with the BMW S1000R. It's the V2 Panigale. There is no way I will be able to wring a V4 out. It will govern me. I will not dominate that bike. It has over 200 horsepower, and by all accounts, it is quite an animal when it gets going, although the electronics on it are fabulous. The V2, however, has the same electronics package as the V4.
Now don't get me wrong, you machismo types. Just because this isn't a V4 doesn't mean it's a super lightweight. It still has 155 horsepower, 77 foot-pounds of torque, compression ratios up to 12.5 to 1. It only weighs 441 pounds. And by all accounts, 44 Teeth gave it a double thumbs up. Fagan was over the moon with how it handled the improvement over the 955, how nosy it was, how easy it was to flick and get round corners. Frankly, he was saying this is all the bike you will need. And for only $18,000 Canadian, it's a good $7,000 or $8,000 cheaper than the V4, with the same electronics package, an engine that I can really thrash and squeeze out and get that wonderful big grin feeling that I'm really making the bike work. I'll never get that on a V4. I just don't have the ability.
So that was the Ducati V2 Panigale. Certainly a more sensible option for me if I want to go that route. I would definitely just swing a leg over that bike. The Arch KR GT1 is ostensibly a cruiser. However, it has had an incredible amount of technology thrown at it. So it's basically American iron with European technology on it. I like many things about this bike, including the build quality, the way that the people have created this bike and turned it into something that is actually a piece of art. If you look at the engine casings on this, the metalwork on it is spectacular. This isn't only a bike for riding, although it does that very well apparently. It is also a bike for looking at.
As your roving eye lingers salaciously over the Arch, you will notice it dripping with all sorts of jewels. From the incredible steampunk detailing on the engine cases, ISR braking hardware, Olin suspension, BST carbon fiber wheels, stunning billet single-piece seat unit, and, believe it or not, a billet tank as well as all of the other high-tech hardware on board. Unlike many other rolling pieces of art, this bike can perform. The 2-liter S&S engine is a nightmare at idle, bouncing around all over the place. But turn that throttle and according to reports, the thing becomes absolutely silky smooth and you start to ride tidal waves of torque. Then there's the handling. The frame and suspension push this into sport bike territory. It is no cruiser when it comes to handling, and it can handle its power beautifully. The stats won't wow you. 90 horsepower, 120 foot-pounds of torque. It's the way it delivers it. But there are some drawbacks. The right peg is engine mounted and there is vibration through it. And the Baker gearbox apparently is quite hard to shift if you get the feet forward option. Oh yeah, everything on this bike is optional.
My only issue with the Arch is their choice of paint. The color schemes for this thing are just dreadful. It's just too bold, too kindergarten Crayola-ish. I'm not sure, after they've done all that wonderful work on the engine cases, they've put so much time into the product development, incorporating the technology to make this a really, really nice bike to ride by all accounts. They've then gone and painted it in that shockingly blue-red color, or the other variation they have as well. Neither of them really do it for me. So if I were to buy one of those, and yes folks, I would need to win the lottery to afford one, they're very expensive. The first thing I would do is go take it to a custom paint shop and get it redone. Or perhaps, because they are basically a handmade motorcycle, they take a lot of time to work on them, perhaps they would give me one of a color that I wanted, but they don't seem to offer that. I'm not sure what we're looking at. Okay, drum roll. The final bike on my list. This bike represents something that no other bike on any list I've ever talked about has. This bike is born from myth, folklore, legend. It is a bike made famous by one individual. In order to afford the bike, I would probably have to win the lottery. And I would say as much of the value of the bike is to do with the fantastic engineering involved in it as is with the mystique and mark. So what is it? Well, I told you that one other bike on my list would have some S's, 1s and 0s in it. And this bike is the Brough Superior SS100 Mark II.
Being a 1000cc water-cooled V-twin, this engine is going to have bags of character and soul. And while 100 horsepower and 64 foot-pounds of torque wedded to a 6-speed gearbox doesn't seem like much, you should probably take into account the machined titanium frame and subframe that helped bring this bike in at under 410 pounds. That's lighter than the BMW S1000RR we started this whole thing with. But wait, there's more. The engineering just doesn't stop. From the cast wishbone fork and twin articulated titanium triangular links and monoshock adjustable for preload, rebound and damping on the front end, to the cast aluminum swing arm pivoting in the engine crankcases at the back. It blows my mind. And you better be careful pulling that front brake lever in. It's connected to 4 stainless steel floating discs with 8 radial calipers. And reportedly, the road holding is absolutely fantastic. But even better than that is the ride. It's unbelievably smooth. No fork dive. But you can park all that meaningless drivel. I just cannot believe how it looks. It does it for me. In the biggest way possible, it does it. It's a steampunk gem. Just looking at it rouses in me the same passions I would get from looking at a Spitfire's Merlin engine. Because this is much more than the mere sum of its admittedly gorgeous parts. Even in its steampunk guise, there's no mistaking this as anything other than the soulful spawn of a legendary and almost mythical motorcycle. A motorcycle ridden for the last time by the diminutive yet mercurial Private T.E. Shaw near his cottage of Clouds Hill in Dorset, May 1935. But of course, you may know him as... well, it doesn't matter. That's not important. And more than any other current bike, this is the one I would love to swing a leg over, to clamp my legs about, rest my bum on, and grin my way along a windy, leafy road. How about you?
This bike has history, it has soul, it is the absolute... what the fuck is the word I'm looking for?